We're going to speed run every question, no breaths.
Okay.
No, I'm curious. So as we look at this broader market where there's uncertainty around tariffs here one day, gone the next, delayed, there's price uncertainty, supply uncertainty. What does that mean for consumer behavior? What are they looking at right now? And then if some of these things become fully realized as major impacts to the economy and to the market, what will change with consumer behavior over the coming year?
I think it's the consumer is going through a schizophrenic stage, in my opinion. The news cycle is up and down. We have tariffs one minute, we have a 90-day pause the next minute. There's a population that doesn't know what a tariff is. It is causing uncertainty not only in the business realm, but it's causing uncertainty for consumers on what they need to do. A lot of talk around, if you're going to buy a car, do it in the next 2 weeks. If you're going to buy this, do it in the next 3 weeks. Report came out today that the shipping container bookings coming out of China into the United States have dropped by 60%. And the boats that are going to be under the new tariff are arriving in the U.S. from China. And so you have active inventory that's in the stores that was pre-bought when these were first being talked about. Now you have net new product coming in at a higher realm. And so consumers are just kind of blinking about, what am I going to do? What am I going to buy? What am I going to buy this year? Should I front load it? The same kind of I don't want to call it panic, but nervousness or instability exists not only on the consumer side, but on the corporate side as well. And that's where I think for marketers, the challenge for us is, how do I speak to both audiences? How do I send my communications to address this in a non-political way? But then also, how do I listen to my C-level about what the direction is and what a pause means, or what changes in direction mean, or budgets, or any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I want to come back to that C-level piece. That is one that we're going to dig into, because I think there's some really interesting commentary to be had there. I want to start, though, with the customer-facing lens. So maybe I'm being a romantic at heart here and saying that I truly do believe our outbound owned channels are our most intimate form of communication with our guest. What does it mean, though, within those channels in this new environment? What are those CRM considerations for that customer anxiety, uncertainty?
Meaning, what should a marketer do with their email program?
Exactly, yes.
It's been an interesting 12 to 16 months in that a lot of companies have doubled down on social media advertising. A lot of people have put money against bought channels, right? And they've not really invested in the owned channels, email, outreach, direct mail. We're seeing a pause in the marketplace in terms of innovation and companies really putting their shoulder against it. What we are seeing is marketers being told, do more with less, or do more with what you have. And in that kind of a market where you don't have the ability to innovate, to change your stack, to add to your stack, then we're just doing the same thing over and over again. And it's an owned channel, but it's almost this expectation that the owned channel will make the same amount of money that it did before, and if I send more email, I'll make more money. It's almost a Christmas strategy or holiday strategy pulled forward to say, well, we'll just do more. And the consequence to that, as everybody in the room knows, is you can't necessarily do more without hurting the long tail, right? The downstream effect of oversending or sending too much or discounting too much or lack of relevance has a downstream effect. And so, yes, companies are going to have to start looking at their own channels more than the invested channels. There was an article on MediaPost this morning that talked about the forecast for Q2 is less spending across the board on bought advertising. And so companies are going to have to shift, or they're going to have to pause, or I think a lot of companies right now are trying to figure out what the hell to do. And that cascades across everything from inventory to pricing strategies to email marketing, social media, the whole gambit.
Yeah, I think the investment piece is interesting, right? Because I think there's a perception when the budgets get locked at the beginning of the year, or at least when they initially get locked, that now your owned channels are free marketing. Like you have so much email you can send in a year, you can just send that out the door. It's not truly free though. There's still a cost associated with it. And then there's the energy, the time, the investments, where you choose to spend your resourcing. So talk to me a little bit more though about that channel mix strategy of what you think brands and companies should be doing as they evaluate.
To be honest, if you don't have a really robust segmentation strategy, you're late, so you need to catch up, right? What is going to help us as email marketers and marketers in general is not only in adhering to that segmentation strategy, but watching the movement, the micro and macro movements of consumers in and out of those segments. What does price do to your customer who's a high-value customer that depends on brand? What does that do in the transitory nature between that group and high discounters? You really want to have a robust, especially on the retail side, and outside of that, every vertical, to really look at how tightly can you target your customers. Because when we have market upheaval, when all these tariffs kick in, whatever is going to go on in the next 6 months, the ability to leverage that segmentation model not only for analysis, but for the movements in and out of deciles is going to be critical, because you're going to have to differentiate your message based upon that decile. If I have a decile of my customers that is a high-value customer and likes and has more brand adhesion to the product, so if I only buy shirts that have the Nike logo, and I don't care what the price is, what I want to look at over time, and especially now, is I want to look at, do they still have that same behavior? Do they require a discount to move the needle? And if prices go up, do they still have that behavior of that purchase, that regular purchase, or that affinity, or have they moved out of that into another cohort? Now, beyond that, if you're sophisticated, you can look at channel propensity. Critically important in how to really look at email doesn't work for everybody. David Baker, who was a long supporter of this show, talked a lot about how email sometimes doesn't work. And it's not that it doesn't work for the consumer all the time. Somebody may react better to push, to text, to email, to a combination of both. And so beyond just that segmentation model and that's cohort driven, you have to really look at how do you focus on a channel propensity that says, I'm not going to send an email, but I'm going to send a push because that customer reacts better. And that's, from a cross-channel owned media perspective, that is the approach marketers have to take right now. Is it's not just about email, and mobile, social, and direct mail. It's got to be a combined strategy across the board, because to weather this storm and the economic uncertainty, you have to do things completely different. This looks completely different than COVID, but think about it this way. If you knew COVID was coming, wouldn't you have done something different? Wouldn't you have prepped for something different? Wouldn't you have tried to read the tea leaves? We're given an opportunity as marketers to have that moment and to prepare now for whatever uncertainty. If the uncertainty doesn't happen, did I lose anything? No, I became smarter, I became tighter in my segmentation, and my reliance on other channels. It's a really long answer, I'm sorry.
No, but it's good, but it's digging into the channel considerations. I want to layer on top of that the content considerations,
Yeah.
and that will be tied to your segmentation, of course, but is there guidance around how you think about your value messaging, transparency, if there are shifts in your supply chain or to your pricing? What are those considerations across subject line, content modules, et cetera?
So here's what I would tell you on messaging around tariffs, price increases, supply shortage. The email marketer needs to have a seat at the table with the people making the decisions at a corporate comms level about how you're going to describe this to the consumer. You have to have that voice. You have to be at the table, and you have to say, I need to tell 10 million people what we're going to say about tariffs. And we need to think about email as a medium. and the channel messaging that goes into it, not just a press release, but we need to think about the long-term effect of how we're going to message this. So when you're talking about or thinking about how you message price increases, that has to be driven from a higher level. Now, as it cascades into the message, into the content, what do I think is going to happen? I think, honestly, it's going to be Christmas all over again. What happens in fourth quarter? It is 20% at least increased cadence to the consumer, and it is price, 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 deal. How are you going to differentiate your message, again, in cohort, when price is going up? It can't go down. And if it can go down, then you're sacrificing margin. So now you start to look at promotions. You're going to take 30% off of the price. Well, the price has been increased by 45% to account for a tariff. So how does that really work into your pricing strategy? And that's a broader conversation that people have to have with their organization, their marketing departments, their C-levels, about how are we going to cascade these prices to our customers? How are we going to explain it? And beyond that, I think what also has to happen is if you have a cohort analysis of your segmentation, then you really need to message beyond price into value, into relationship, into return policies, into all these different things that make you stand out instead of just the discount. If your relationship with the consumer is just based on discount, you don't have a relationship. Because when the discount goes away, so does the customer. Now, the good thing is this is going to happen across the board. Everybody is impacted the same way. So it's about how do you differentiate your brand, not just by sending freaking more email.
I'm glad you brought up the end of the customer may ultimately bounce, right? Mm-hmm. It may ultimately yield that some customers are driven away when value is no longer an option or might not be tenable for a moment. Yep. And even if you do have strong value offerings, some customers may still say, hey, I got to protect my wallet. I'm going to press pause for a bit. So Sonia was just up here talking about lapsed guest strategies. Do you view that there is a heightened focus on building out a new lapsed guest approach as we head into potential turmoil here, or is that just, talk to me a little bit about how you would approach that.
Number one, everybody get online after the conference and go watch Sonia's presentation again. It was amazing, and it's exactly the kind of thought that you should put into a win-back program or a reactivation program, right? We know customers are going to trite. We know customers are going to pull back on their wallet. Consumer spending is going to decrease. That's already been forecasted, right? So what do you offer in a win-back program that's different than 20 off 50? And not that anything was wrong with what Sonia did, but 20 off 50 may not work now. So you're going to have a separate reactivation strategy just for this moment in time. Yesterday we talked about a welcome back strategy for people that left a subscription and then came back. You may want to look at a welcome back strategy if you have high attrition on the other side of whatever this is going to be. But automation, recognition of micro and macro movements inside and outside of segmentation, you've really got to prep your automation to be relevant to the period that we're in, and not just a typical win-back strategy that's like 5 emails over 3 months and come back and escalating, blah, 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 blah. Toss the best practice on a lot of programs. Don't toss it out the window. Let me take that back. Start with what has been best practice for the last 20 years and adapt it for what we're going on, what's going to happen today. Again, back to my earlier comment. If you knew COVID was coming, what would you do different? Well, you guys all have an opportunity to look at what happened in COVID, what you predict may happen, and put that into place at this point in your automations, in your life cycle, and all that stuff.
Now, it's not just consumers that get rattled. And where I kind of want to end off this conversation today is marketers get rattled too. In fact, they may be sitting out in the crowd right now saying, what the heck is happening? Where do they start? You talked about approaching your C-level, integrating into conversations where historically CRM and email marketers may not have been integrated into a company, as well as like this approach to relooking at your cohorts, your segmentation. It can be a lot to chew. Where do you start? What's your first bite?
First, if you have budget to spend it, right? And that's not a greedy thing. If you want to spend it with me, that'd be cool. But Listen, if you have budget, if you can get rid of money, if you can invest, future-proof. I used to do it all the time when I was on the retail side. I called my agency partner, I'd call a company and I said, I'm going to park $100,000 there. I'm going to use it at some point, but I need to get it off the books. If you have money to spend, invest now in the fast-track ways that you need to get prepared. Second, come up with the questions that we've been talking about. What are the questions that you have for your C-level? What is the differentiation in your program that you need to take? Put together a plan. I'll give props to the MediaPost team and all their newsletters that they send out. I subscribe to them all, and I was reading the agency one this morning that goes over all the movement inside of the big 6 agencies, right? And that's where I picked up the stuff about shipping containers and all that stuff. You have to be educated. During COVID, one of the themes that I put out there in articles was you need to watch the news, at least the nightly news, a half-hour a night, to find out what's going on, because your customers are watching the same thing. So come up with a list of questions. Come up with your segmentation model that says, okay, you've got a message. How are we going to explain it to this group, this group, this group, this group, this group? Because it all has to be different. And then come up with your contingency plans. Think of this as, I got to really move quickly. And come up with that plan and present it to your boss, to your executives, and say, I need a seat at the table because I'm in charge of 10 million people, or whatever it is.
Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate you digging into a lot of this uncertainty with what felt like good certainty.
I've been making stuff up for 20 years.
What questions do you have?
Well, I just liked Ryan saying, hey, we got to move quickly, from the guy who's on a cane.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're moving pretty quick for a guy who's on a knee thing.
Doing okay.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Any questions, guys? Oh, yes. Wells Fargo. I love it. I love it. You always have something good.
Joyce Poole with Wells Fargo. So Ryan, it's been a minute since I've been out of retail. So tell me if this is valid or not. We talk about reactivation strategy, right? But it's reasonable to assume that product availability is going to become a problem. So is there a proactivation strategy where you should look at your customers and figure out their shipping patterns, and those customers that typically buy from you but want it overnight might need a different communication about, could be late, versus another segment who buys and accepts a 1 week or 10-day delivery or something like that?
No, you're absolutely right, and I think it was a good reminder. There's 2 things there. The first is, within that segmentation model, you have different qualities of each cohort group, right? Spends this much, does this frequency, likes free shipping, likes it next day. You have to have that all defined, right? And you need to crystallize that idea, because they're going to want different options. They're going to want to know, I can get it next day, I can get it in 10 days. You're going to want to really specify the message to the cohort group, whatever you do. The second thing is, go back and look at your out-of-stock emails. Probably when was the last time you touched those? 5 years ago? Longer? You're going to have to redo the messaging in each of those out-of-stock emails. And if you maybe implement a strategy where if quantity is limited, maybe that's the impetus to spur sales, not a discount. Low inventory, quantities are limited, blah, blah, blah. That's part of your messaging to your point, to say, order it now, get it FedExed, it'll be to you tomorrow, have a nice day, you'll get it, right? What customers are going to look for is, do you have the widget I want, and am I willing to pay the price? Each of those is an attribution point. Great question.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. Much appreciated.
Thanks.